Your teen requested a ride, but this time not from you. It's through their Uber teen account. You drive your teenager around, a lot, to their friend Jacob's house, their other friend Jake's house, to James's, to Jaden's, to Jalen's, to...
Mom? This is Jake's house, not Jacob's.
Now with an Uber teen account, your teen can request a ride under your supervision. They'll ride with a highly rated driver, and with live trip tracking, you'll follow along the whole ride to their friends' houses that all sound the same. Add your teen to your Uber account today. See app for details.
Bye, Mom.
Summer's here, and you can now get almost anything you need for your sunny days delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parmesan delivered. A cabana? That's a no. But a banana? That's a yes. A nice tan? Sorry, nope. But a box fan? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse on your favorite streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. You can follow the Red Treehouse on social media, on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, X, Threads, and Facebook at Red Treehouse Pod. And now you can find the Red Treehouse on Patreon. Join the Red Treehouse community for as little as $3 per month and receive exclusive member benefits, including personal shoutouts, early access to episodes, bonus episodes, and more. Simply go to patreon.com/Red Treehouse. As always, if you have a scary story or topic you'd like me to feature on an upcoming episode, email redtreehousepod@gmail.com. Important note, sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. Let's start with a question. Have you ever wanted to communicate with the dead? Maybe for the sake of curiosity, to see if it can be done. Maybe there's a deeper longing to communicate one more time with a lost loved one. Maybe you're a skeptic who thinks it's all smoke and mirrors and dim lighting. What's fascinating is that the desire to communicate with the dead transcends cultures and eras, with people across the globe and spanning history, seeking someone on the other side. For millennia, people have attempted various rituals to catch a glimpse or a word of someone who was no longer there. Nowadays, there are a variety of tools that supposedly allow you to communicate with the dead, including spirit boxes, Ouija boards, and more. But among the most well-known and controversial ways to communicate with the dead are seances. At least in America, the seance goes back over 200 years and is often led by a medium or psychic who, quote, claim to be able to channel the spirits of the dead and impart messages to the living participants, end quote. In this episode of The Red Treehouse, we're going to explore the scary world of seances. Is it possible to legitimately communicate with the dead? Or is it nothing more than hocus pocus and sleight of hand? I'll share the details. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. The word seance is a French word meaning sitting. In the most technical sense, a seance is a meeting of a small group of individuals who want to communicate with the dead. A medium, or someone who claims to be in contact with spirits of the dead and to communicate between the dead and the living, often acts as a conduit. Seances have historically been connected to spiritualism, a social religious movement which began in 1848 and continued into the early 1900s. The movement claims the, quote, spirits of the dead residing in the spirit world have both the ability and the inclination to communicate with the living, end quote. It is important to grasp the basic premise of spiritualism because it formed the basis of the seance. Spiritualists asserted the spirit world, or afterlife, was not a static place, but one that continued to evolve. This allowed spirits to move in and out of both realms and communicate with the living. As such, the ability for living human beings to communicate with the dead was deemed important, as the spirits could offer otherworldly wisdom that could be of benefit in real time and otherwise out of reach. As a religious movement, spiritualism reached its peak from the late 1840s to the late 1920s, and is a fascinating case study, as it did not have a formal text or organization. Instead, it began as a sort of grassroots movement and picked up steam for nearly 80 years. One of the central tenets of spiritualism is the belief that the spirits of dead people are, quote, discarnate humans, end quote, who are capable of growth and maturity as they reside in the afterlife. Because the afterlife is a constantly evolving place, spiritualists claim communication with the dead is not only possible, but necessary. But because spirits exist in a higher plane, mediums are often required to be conduits between the two worlds. These mediums are uniquely gifted. However, anyone can become a capable medium with enough study and practice. According to one article, there were several reasons why spiritualism became popular in the mid-1800s. First, it offered a way to communicate with dead loved ones. An interesting note, the life expectancy in the late 1840s was younger than 40 years old, and the infant mortality rate was significantly higher than it is today. Second, spiritualism affirmed an afterlife and offered peace to those fearful of dying. In a way, spiritualism offered the hope that death was not the end, but possibly the beginning. Third, advances in science led to the discovery of both electricity and magnetism. Electricity and magnetism are generally unseen forces, which contribute to the possibility that one will be able to communicate with the dead. And fourth, spiritualism allowed women to have places of power, authority, and prestige. And in fact, most mediums were women. We know spiritualists believed in communicating with the dead, but how exactly did they do this? Mediums would often employ a variety of tactics and tools throughout the seance to attempt to communicate with the spirit world. Because natural light was considered an enemy of the spirit world, a seance often occurred in a dark or dimly lit room, with little to no lighting, natural or otherwise. Group members would sit in a circle and hold hands. Some mediums were fully conscious while functioning as a conduit, while other mediums would fall into a partial or full trance. Often, they had no memory of what happened upon coming to full consciousness. Mediums also employed the use of various communication tools, including spirit boards, talking boards, Ouija boards, spirit trumpets, spirit slates, seance tables, and spirit cabinets, among others. The first three utilized a planchette, or pointer, which moved to the letters on the board. As a spirit communicated, the planchette would move, letter by letter, to form words, sentences, or entire phrases. A spirit trumpet was an early form of spirit box, which was believed to magnify the voices of spirits to audible levels. We will explore how to conduct a seance in just a bit. As with anything related to the supernatural and paranormal, believers were adamant that communication with the dead was not only possible, but essential. Equally as staunch are skeptics, who view spiritualism and seances with a sharp eye, and often claim communicating with the dead is nothing more than an elaborate hoax. To be sure, many supposed mediums have been exposed as frauds. A Guardian article titled "The Psychology of Spiritualism, Science and Seances," dated October 19, 2013, offered an interesting first-hand perspective on the shock and concern about seances and mediums. Quote, "Last week, I spent 40 minutes with a telephone spiritualist who passed on messages from 4 dead people. Like all mediums, she was skilled at cold reading, the use of probable guesses, and picking up of cues to steer her in the right direction. If she hit a dud, the suggestion that she was in the presence of a 40-year-old uncle of mine, she quickly widened it out. The 40-year-old became an older person who felt young at heart, and then someone who was more of an uncle figure. She was also skilled at the Barnum effect, the use of statements that tend to be true for everyone. Among dozens of guesses and misses, there was just one hit, the correct name of a dead relative. Their relation to me was utterly wrong, as were details of their health. But the name was right. And even though it was a common name among that person's generation, it was a briefly chilling moment." End quote. Perhaps 2 of the most famous mediums, who turned out to be frauds, were the Fox sisters. I'll pique your curiosity now and tease an upcoming episode of the Red Treehouse, focused specifically on the Fox sisters. Let's say you still want to try your hand at hosting a seance. How do you do it? I'll tell you now. First, choose a location to conduct the seance. The location must be darkened and quiet, with little to no light coming in. Be sure the location is comfortable for all of the participants. While conducting research, I came across an interesting note. There are some who believe the location of the seance must be haunted, while others said it didn't have to be haunted, so long as a spirit feels welcome. Second, invite people to participate. Something interesting. It's been said that seances are more likely to be successful if you invite people who believe communication with the spirit world is possible, rather than skeptics. Also, be sure to prepare anyone who might be afraid of ghosts or the supernatural. Things may get uncomfortable. Third, choose a preferred tool for communicating with the dead. A spirit board, spirit box, Ouija board, and more. Then, choose one person, or if you're brave enough, choose yourself, to function as a medium. Fourth, make the space a welcoming place for spirits. Use tablecloths to cover the table you'll be sitting at. Burn incense and a small number of candles, as it is thought spirits are attracted to heat and dimly lit sources. Fifth, ask the spirit basic questions. It's helpful to think of questions ahead of time rather than trying to do it spontaneously. Also important, make your sentences simple, preferably that allow for a yes or a no answer. Sixth, when you're done with the seance, it is important to close the door to the spirit world. Be sure to thank the spirits for visiting, tell the spirits farewell, and ask them to move along. If you're acting as a medium or conduit, there is no specific ritual to get the seance started, though there are a few helpful suggestions. First, be sure to help organize people at the table and encourage them to hold hands to start. Second, open the door to the spirit world by asking the spirits to join the group. An important note: if you're trying to contact a specific spirit, be sure to use their full name. Some mediums prefer to chant the spirit's name or a simple statement, but it is up to you to decide what's best. When asking the spirits to join the group, be sure to ask for confirmation of their presence. Ask them to ring a bell, move the planchette, initiate a soft breeze, or if you're brave enough, a temporary possession. Third, when closing the seance, be sure to thank the spirits, say farewell, and ask them to move along and not linger. Even though seances and spiritualism had their heyday nearly 100 years ago, people today are still conducting them to try and communicate with the dead, often with scary results. Here are two stories. Our first scary encounter is from Reddit user writer_girl. Quote, growing up, I went through phases where I believed in fairies and monsters and all other manner of creatures, but not ghosts. Never ghosts. Maybe something about your spirit being forced to stay on Earth seemed too terrible or outlandish to be true. Maybe I didn't let myself believe because I was too afraid. No matter what the case might have been, I never worried about them. Not until we moved into a new house the summer before 8th grade. After living in that house for a year, I will never question their existence again. The moment I stepped into the basement, I could feel that something terrible had happened there. Later, I found out that a little boy had been brutally murdered by his stepfather in the home. During that year, many strange things happened. Doors were locked on me, furniture moved, items were lost and then found in strange places, lights where no lights should have been, things thrown, paper scribbled on. The scribbles were just loops all over the page. It's important to remember that. And the feeling that I was almost always being watched. The incident that stands out most to me is the day my baby brother was in his high chair and suddenly tipped forward. Luckily, he wasn't hurt. But no matter what I did, I sat in it and leaned forward and even rocked back and forth. I could not tip it over, even though I weighed at least 100 pounds more than he did. Someone would have had to have been behind him and pushed him forward. Living there was at times terrifying, and I can safely say that I never want to go back. But that's not the story I'm here to tell. A few years ago, a group of my friends and I decided to hold a seance. After living with the child spirit, I was hesitant. I wasn't even sure I believed in seances. It's one thing to believe in ghosts, but another to believe in summoning them. Eventually I agreed, since I assumed nothing would happen, and I felt that sitting in my best friend's living room alone would be worse than anything that could take place. We looked up seances on Google and set to work covering all the mirrors and glass. Then we lit 3 candles and set them on a round table like the site instructed. We also left a bowl of fresh fruit and a paper and pen. Then, we sat in a circle across from who we felt we were most opposite, personality-wise. Everyone, of course, wanted to summon the child spirit from my past, which made me even more nervous. We dimmed the lights and began the chant we had found online. Nothing happened. I was thoroughly relieved and almost smug. This isn't going to work, I had assured everyone. As much as I pitied him, I never wanted to be in the presence of that little boy again. But then we began chanting again, and some of the girls closed their eyes. My friend, we'll call her Heather, who I was sitting next to, sunk forward in her chair, and her eyelids began twitching. I was kind of annoyed. No, I was very annoyed. I figured someone would fake something, but I hadn't suspected Heather. She'd been hesitant about this too. Some of the other girls began to laugh, and finally I did too, even daring to ask, "Heather, are you dead?" She didn't respond, but then her whole body began to twitch as if she was having a seizure. My best friend, who was on the other side, quickly let go of her hand, and Heather snapped up and stared at us with terrified eyes. You guys, I couldn't talk or stop twitching. All the other girls were amazed, but to be frank, I thought it was a bunch of bullshit. I lived with that kid for months and hadn't felt him there with us. Heather and all the others wanted to continue, so I took hold of her hand and began chanting, now positive that nothing would happen. Heather began twitching again, this time more violently. She began scribbling on the paper, and terror shot through me as she began drawing loops like I'd once seen on a piece of paper left out on my bedroom floor years before. I'd never told anyone about that. "Do you have a connection with someone in this room?" My best friend asked aloud. 1 line for yes, 2 for no. Heather drew 1 light line on the paper. "Is it writer girl?" "Guys, let's end this," I blurted. So one of the other girls broke the circle, and Heather's head snapped up again. "I wanted to draw 1 line again," she said, turning towards me. "I'm done. This is stupid," I told the others, and headed upstairs to sit with my best friend's younger sister, all the while telling myself the loops were a coincidence. I sat out for the next couple of summonings, but then my best friend's sister decided she wanted to summon Walt Disney, so we returned to the basement. The girls had supposedly summoned other spirits while we were gone, and wanted to try Walt Disney too, so I settled back into my place at the table. Once again, Heather began to twitch. Everything seemed to be going okay as the girls took turns asking Walt questions. I was still skeptical about the whole thing, despite what had happened less than an hour before. Until my best friend demanded, "Were you a Nazi?" Something changed then. Heather stopped to speak, something that, according to her, she hadn't been able to do during the other summonings. "You just really offended him," she said, sounding almost panicked. "I think you should apologize and let him go." I began to stand up and tried to let go of Heather's hand. "Don't," she yelled. "He'll get stuck here." We said the words to release him and sat in silence, contemplating. "Can we summon Princess Diana?" Heather finally asked. "I'm supposed to be related to her." Which is far from the truth, just so everyone knows. So we began chanting once again. And after saying the chant twice, my right hand twitched. "Oh my God," I remember thinking. "You're really letting your imagination get to you now. You're starting to make your hand twitch just like Heather." But then it stopped. And as soon as it did, Heather started to twitch like crazy next to me. Then my hand started twitching once again. And no matter what I did to try and stop it, it wouldn't stop. I ignored it, thinking it was residual from Heather, and we started asking questions. We asked what we felt like we should, then released her, and started to talk amongst ourselves, planning to be finished for the night. What happened next, I'll never forget. One of the candles bubbled, like when you're 7 and blowing bubbles in your milk at school. One of the girls screamed, and another of my friends, Claire, the one leading the session, quickly reached forward to blow out the candles. She blew the first one out, but then as she reached for the second, the one that had bubbled, Heather began twitching next to me. Then, I began to do the same. My neck and right arm twitched violently, and I had absolutely no control over them, or any other part of my body. It felt like someone was behind me, squeezing my shoulders. My circle of friends went in and out of focus. I realized it was because I was blinking so rapidly. Then suddenly, a wave of sadness washed over. It was intense and awful. In that 1 second, I felt so helpless and terrible. There didn't seem to be a point to anything. Tears immediately pierced my eyes, and I began blubbering. I distinctly remember my best friend screaming, "She's not effing around, guys. Writer girl can't act." I remember hearing her yell. I've known that girl for almost 20 years, and I've never heard so much terror in her voice. And at that moment, I remember thinking that nothing else mattered besides calming my friends down. I felt guilt and confusion because of their fright, and I couldn't understand it. I wanted them to understand that I wasn't being hurt. According to every girl at the table, I began reassuring them and repeating, "It's not bad. She's not hurting me," over and over again, even though I don't remember saying it. At some point I remember thinking, I have to check on Heather. And I looked over and she was staring straight ahead, a blank expression on her face. At that point, Claire released the spirit and blew out the remaining candles. I fell back against the chair I was in. I'd been twitching more violently than I had thought. Something close to pandemonium broke out as my friends got out of their chairs and rushed towards Heather and I, who were still tightly gripping hands, to make sure we were okay. I was so weak and exhausted that I couldn't walk for nearly half an hour after it ended. Some people might argue that I caused the whole thing subconsciously, on my own. I disagree. Before it happened, I didn't believe in seances. I'd never had a seizure. And where did those emotions, that weren't mine, come from? After recovering a little, Heather turned to me and said, "I've never been so sad before." I wanted to cry. How did we both feel that? When 3 a.m. came around that same night, we all grew uneasy and left my friend's basement to huddle together on her couch. We sat there, paralyzed by fear, until 4 a.m. In the months to follow, many strange things occurred at my friend's house, and we were all plagued by nightmares. The majority of our group became convinced that we messed with something we shouldn't have. We felt like we had let at least 2 spirits into my friend's house. A ghost we felt we had to refer to as Emily, and something else, something that lurked between 3 and 4 a.m. Even I think this story sounds crazy, but it's 100% true. Did we really contact Princess Diana? Probably not. But there was someone, or something, there. Whoever it was seemed nice. They didn't harm me. In fact, once the whole thing was over, I felt strangely peaceful. It wasn't until later that I looked back with fear. I don't really expect anyone to believe it. If I was reading this story in someone's post, I wouldn't. But I hope it sparks thought. I know it made me think and changed my views on a lot of things. For instance, I hate the number 3 now, and I'm terrified of Ouija boards. Do not mess with them. I'm not a particularly religious person, nor do I know for sure what's out there. But I hope that my experiences with spirits can bring someone else assurance, or at the very least hope, for what inevitably awaits us all. And seriously, people, don't mess with Ouija boards. End quote. Our second scary encounter is from a deleted Reddit user, likely a throwaway account. Quote, "Never again in my life will I ever touch a Ouija board or the like. It's my first semester in college and I'm living at home. I've always had a slight interest in the paranormal, but never really experienced anything significant. One day, I decide to catch up on one of my high school girlfriends. We'll call her Kara. Kara and I recently had a mutual friend die. Now, I'm not going to lie, and I don't mean to speak ill of his life, but he did die doing a really stupid thing. He and his friends decided to go drunk driving and then car surf on top of the car one night. Unsurprisingly, he fell off and was killed instantly when he hit the ground. We weren't exactly close with him, but we had known him since elementary school, so we found it fitting to attend his funeral and cut out his obituary from the paper as a keepsake. Well, one night we had the crazy idea to perform a seance and try to get in touch with this friend. We honestly thought nothing of it. We didn't think anything would happen. We were alone at night in the office or media room of my parents' house when we decided to do it. We did a little bit of generic Google research and began. We decided to start with an elder relative of mine that had recently passed. Her name was Ouida. I had an old quilt of hers that she made herself, so we put that in the middle as a kind of altar with some white candles. We put a cup upside down in between us on a flat surface and placed our fingers lightly on the ridged edges. I mentioned simple things that I knew Ouida would understand, and we occasionally felt the cup move in a circular pattern, but everything was very, very gentle. Once we ended our conversation with Ouida, we began to prepare for our friend. We placed the obituary in the middle, as it was all we had of his, placed our fingers on the cup, and began. Remember when I said that Ouida's presence was very gentle? Well, our friend's wasn't. We asked simple questions and gave instructions that moving the cup to the right meant yes, and to the left meant no. Are we the first to contact you? Yes. Do you remember us from school? Yes. Do you remember what you were doing when you died? No. We weren't entirely convinced, until I decided to mention a name that I knew Kara did not know. The last name of the driver. Without warning Kara, I simply said the last name, and the cup moved in several circles to the right. Yes, yes, Yes. Clearly, whatever was speaking to us understood the significance of that name, because I knew for a fact Kara did not. Kara and I trust each other, and to this day firmly claim that neither of us moved the cup ourselves. Something was moving the cup for sure. We were contacting something, somewhere, somehow. The cup wouldn't stop moving. Now, it wasn't wildly spinning throughout the room like in horror movies, but it was definitely still moving, even lifting off of the ground as it circled from side to side. We ended the conversation right then and there, afraid that things had already gone too far. We blew out the candle like Google told us to do, and put the obituary and quilt away. Everything seemed to calm down, and we still had the rest of the night to talk about it among ourselves, which we did. Somehow, we fell asleep. The next morning was surreal but normal, until we noticed that the cutout paper obituary was nowhere to be found. Fast forward to 4 years later. That room is fucked up. That office and media room we performed the seance in has never been the same, and it is not my imagination. Kara and I gradually lost touch as friends, but stayed connected through social media. We don't talk about what happened, or about the missing obituary. Obviously, the whole thing didn't have as much of an effect on Kara as it did me. You see, my parents still live in that house, and I still have to interact with whatever that thing is. While I was still living there, one of my very devout Christian friends would swear that she saw something with evil red eyes inside the closet on more than one occasion. Why she wouldn't immediately wake me up, I'll never know. But she claims that she has constant struggles with demons in her life, especially at night. I can't go into that room without the most distinct feeling that I've ever felt, like I'm being watched. That room is where we keep the family computer, and I often found myself being forced to print out homework and other things. The whole feel of the room is just miserable and dark. Whenever I'm alone, I swear that it ventures out into the rest of the house. I can feel it. Whether it's nighttime or daytime, I feel the need to acknowledge its presence, even saying hello and goodbye, because it just feels awkward not to. I've seen more shadows than I can remember in that house, and they all seem to run back to that one room. My mom would always think that I was yelling for her when I hadn't said a word. I didn't believe her until one night I distinctly heard my name being called out. There was no mistake. I thought it was my mom, so I went to see what's up, if she needed me to help bring in groceries or something. I was greeted with confusion as the entire house was quiet. I was home alone. I can't be alone there anymore. It's too spooky. I've never talked to my parents about it. I'm afraid to tell them because they are super Christian and would be pissed that we even did the seance, not to mention the fact that they would never believe me. So why am I the only one that notices this presence? I've since moved out, and my parents have never seemed to have had any problems. To be clear, I know now that we did not talk to Ouida or our friend. We only talked to something acting like them. It knew Ouida was a kind, elderly lady, and it knew that my friend died while drunk driving. It had all the ingredients it needed to trick two girls that had never done anything like this before. Luckily, I've never felt the presence anywhere except that house, so I know nothing has followed me. But still, we brought something into this world that night, and it's still there. Maybe it's waiting, or maybe it's comfortable where it is. Who knows? I'll confess, I've always been too scared to play with a Ouija board or attempt a seance, even though I'm intrigued by the concept. And though I've always found the possibility of communicating with the dead to be fascinating, most of my paranormal experiences have scared me. So to this point, I've avoided all attempts. At the same time, I can understand why someone would choose to communicate with the dead. Maybe out of curiosity, sure, but also maybe for a sense of comfort. Having lost my dad recently, one of the deepest pains is knowing I won't be able to talk with him again. And though I'm content with our last conversations, there are times where I wish I could just pick up the phone and hear his voice. For those who long to communicate with a lost loved one, a seance might offer a certain reassurance and comfort. But what if it doesn't? As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with a lingering question. Is communication with the dead possible? Can we legitimately conjure the spirit of a lost loved one? Or are seances a conduit to something far darker and more sinister? I've shared the details. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.